Good to be back. How many of you, is this your first time here at the training? So we got some new teams. By the way, who are the Ladsy folks? I thought okay. So greetings from my dear friend Sue Gallagher. She's your professional development person and a good friend of mine, a graduate school friend, and so that's where I stay when I come out and get to do these things. So it's fun to come back. Actually, the first time, you know how Sherry lured me out here? She said I was going to be seeing the HI teams, and I assumed that meant Hawaii. So I thought, well, man, how can you pass that up? No, I don't begrudge her that though. I mean, I was an administrator of a school program. It was called a school of last resort. When kids had gone through all the city schools and county schools, SELPA schools, what you would call co-op schools, and they had no other publicly run programs, they would come to us. We were private, worked with the kids whose behavior was too severe to be handled in publicly run programs. School of last resort is not the kind of name you really want to go work there in most cases. So we thought it would be better if we just called it a resort. So I understand why the HI, Hawaii, hearing them anyway. I'm glad to be back out here. I lived out here for a short while during internship, had a lot of fun out here, still have some good friends out here, and it's good to come back and see some faces I recognize and make some new friends as well. So glad you're here, glad I'm here. I want you to be comfortable today. If there's anything that you need, please let one of the staff know or let me know, and we'll try to make sure that you get well taken care of. But before we really get started with some of the content, I want to sort of honor what you do, and I'm hoping that we can get this will work. We didn't get speakers today, so we're going to try this. And maybe you'll recognize what you do in this video clip.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats, don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether. Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, it is ripped to shreds, you know. You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do. I wouldn't do nothing else. It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost to one of them, ain't a feeling like in the world.
We can get you that video if you want to dodge it. All they do is deal with data. We deal with people, right? What do they know about herding cats? By the way, it is herding, not hurting, right? Just want to make sure we know that. Good. Anybody recognize yourself in there? Feel like you're herding cats sometimes? I think we've all sort of had that place where it can be a struggle. I want to just acknowledge that what you do is an important job. If, in the scheme of things, America valued people based on truly on their value to humanity and to our culture, parents would be first and educators would be second. I guess I can keep dreaming, but I want to tell you I know that what you do is an important job, and I hope that you walk out of the room this afternoon with something that will make your job easier, make your life better, quality of life for the students that you serve every day. Here's what I'd like you to do. You have a couple of packets. Everybody should have gotten a packet with a little schoolhouse on the front that has a presentation, the PowerPoint presentation in it. And you have some other loose handouts. One of those inside the Commitment for Success Agreement is a pretest. It's 2 pages. Looks like this. It should be about the 4th page behind this Commitment for Success Agreement. Able to find that? Okay. Here's what I would like you to do. I'd like to take about 10 minutes right now. I would like you to go through and answer the questions on this individually. Work individually on this. We want to make sure that I, as a teacher, am delivering delivering in a way that you can grab it and hold on to it. So let's take just about 10 minutes and complete the individual pretest here.
I think I'm missing that packet.
Is anybody else missing? Okay, we'll get you one.
Okay, thanks.
3, 2, and 1. You don't need to put your names on this, but we would like to get these back, because what we will do is we will look at them again. You'll do it again at the end of day 2 and at the end of day 3, and that sort of lets me know how things are going. So what we're going to need to have you do is turn the corner over, since it's on 2 pages. Bend the corners over and make a little tear so that the 2 pieces stick together. And then if you would pass it here, she bent it over at the corner, bent it over, and then did a little tear. And then you just tip the sides down. You ever done this before? Oh, wow. You'll walk away with a skill after today that you'll never forget. This is what happens when you're a graduate student. You don't have the money for staples. All right. Okay, 9:30 to 2:30. Is that what you were expecting today? Okay. My expectations: learn. Participation is valued. If you have questions, raise your hand and we will come back to those issues. If it's coming up later, I may put that off. If I do ask you to delay that, make sure I come back and we do go over it. Support learning. This is where I check my phone, and if you want to check your phone, I'd appreciate it to make sure that it's on manners mode. If you do need to take a call, I would ask that you leave the room in order to do that. Now, I know that some people go, isn't that kind of obvious? Not. I was actually doing a presentation at a national conference. There was, I think, 6 or 7 of us on the panel. We each had about 10 or 15 minutes. And I think I was 3rd. And I got up, started doing my little bit. In the middle, one of my co-presenters' phone rang. Now, that happens. I get that. I've left my phone on at times. But what I wasn't expecting was that she answered it, stood over to the side of the stage, and talked at full volume on her phone. I thought, I can do this. I've worked with behavior disordered kids. I can do this. So I made it through that. I sat down. A few people later, she got up. I kid you not. In the middle of her presentation, her phone went off and she answered it. I'm sorry, I'll have to get back with you. I'm kind of busy right now. Put the phone away, and everybody sat in stunned silence. I think she interpreted that as rapt attention. But so I try not to make any assumptions. And as I go through the day with expectations here, as I work with students, I think no assumptions is a great place to always begin. So if there are things that you've heard before, you'll know that it's based on making no assumptions as we get started. Self-care, misery is optional. The restrooms are right across the hall right here, and there's some pastries and coffee and tea and water and things. So I'm not bothered at all if you need to get up and take care of yourself. You want to stand up, sit down, lay down, whatever you want to do, I'm fine with that. All I ask is if you do those things, do them in the back of the room. So let's see, confidentiality. It's really important when we're talking in a group like this. We will be talking about students who are real people. And we must ensure that we use little enough information and no names so that they are not identifiable to people who do not have a need to know. I have been in situations where people have overheard conversations about people they know and are not involved with, and that is a thing that I really want to stress. No names and not so much information that other people would know who they are. Have fun, safe and respectful environment. What other things do you need before we get started in the way of housekeeping? Okay. If we need to come back to that, we can revisit that at any time. So let's talk a little bit about the training today. I want to start by shaping the concerns just a little bit, or shaping the training a little bit, and I want to start by talking about my concern. You all are smart, educated, passionate about what you do. I know this. And many of you have been through, at least, as Sherry and I were talking on Friday, have been through, let's see, I was here in November of '06. Is that right? So in the last 2 years, many of you have been through a number of FBA trainings. Terry Scott was here, among others. Good people who really know the technology, and so I'm guessing that many of you know a lot about the technology of thinking functionally, functional assessment, or functional analysis, or all three. How many of you have been at least 3 or 4 trainings on functional assessment? How many of you have done a functional assessment before? Okay. So for many of you, my concern is a lot of this technology is going to be repeated, which nothing wrong with iteration and reiteration, right? Running it through the synapses again. On the other hand, I want to make sure that I take something to just a little bit greater level. And so one of the things that I had come thinking about was this idea of how do we build infrastructure. And Sherry's concerned that, you know, you have maybe a lot of struggles with that because you are not responsible for the building. You are often encapsulated inside of a larger program. Some of you that may be good news, and some of you that may not be good news. I understand that. But I want to talk to you a little bit just about some of the issues around building infrastructure, and we'll think about that as well as going through some of the skills and looking at how you can coach others in some of those skills. So, question, ever been stumped by student behavior and felt like it was up to you to fix it? You're on your own? Been told that it's the student and or his family's problem, the school really couldn't do anything about it, you're on your own? What about been part of a behavior support planning team that didn't have the right resources available to them? Is this sounding familiar? Ringing a bell? For some of you, you're nodding. And what about developed an outstanding behavior support plan, only to have it left in the drawer and then watch the student fail? And then they say, behavior support planning is a waste of time. Why should I come to the meeting? Particularly if I'm an administrator, I've got more important things to do. I'm needed at the district office. Ever feel like you're out there all alone? When you're in space, or after a BSP meeting, no one can hear you scream. Isn't that or like something bad may be about to happen and your school isn't behind you? Or just barely hanging in there? I want to talk a little bit today about some of the systems of support and some of the infrastructure. Chris Borgmar, I liked this slide, and so I stole it out of one of his presentations. We were talking at the Leadership Training Institute that we did a couple weeks ago in Oregon. It talks about the ability of schools to sustain effective and accurate implementation of school-wide PBS is largely dependent upon the school district and local regional supports that are in place. Okay, that's the school-wide piece. Why am I talking about it? Because the reality is this logic can be extended to all the other supports we put in place. What's the infrastructure there to support it? So what I want to do here is to walk through a little bit about what I planned, and then I want to get some feedback from you in terms of some of these things. So how many of you were here in November '06 when I presented? Okay. So it looks like about maybe 50, 60%, something like that. Okay. So some of you, there will be a review of some of this. I want to go very quickly through the historical, ethical, and legal pieces of it just very, very briefly, just as a review. You have more slides in your packet than I will be going through at any kind of detail. That's fine. If you want to know more about it, give me a call or email me, or you can look it up on the web or those kind of things. Evidence-based versus traditional approaches, and why does that matter? Then we're going to talk about programmatic pieces reframed for individual student support systems. This is the PBS philosophy and theory, and I'm going to take it from where we talked about it as school-wide pieces into how does that relate to the individual student system. Building the system goes into some of the skill sets that are required in the school-wide, but how does that apply when strengthened and increased at the level of an individual support system? Infrastructure, talking about building systems of support. What do you need in place so that you're not alone? And so that the practices, the things that you want done in your support plan will actually be carried out with fidelity and sustainability. And finally, there's a couple of things that I want you to go through at the end here. We're going to really talk about two things in particular. Is just a really brief how to present a case. Part of this is how do we get people to talk about cases in ways that are meaningful? When we're talking about students and we're talking about behavior, how can we condense that down into a discussion where the meetings don't go ad infinitum? Anybody have that issue? You sit in meetings and it goes on and on and on, and we talk about the elections, and we talk about the family, and we talk about the breakdown in society, and by the time we get around to talking about the student's behavior, you're asleep, head firmly between the books. So we want to talk a little bit about presenting cases, and then I want to start working towards, how many of you thought you were coming here just to listen? I hope nobody raises their hand, because I'm going to actually have some tasks that you're going to do, and there is an assignment that you'll be doing in between now and my return in November. So if you thought you were coming to listen, you might be needing some encouragement to move. But we're going to talk about thinking functionally about behavior and teaching your colleagues and the others in the school how to think functionally about behavior. Here's some other options, and I want you to give me a little bit of feedback. Systems thinking and systems change. You're not in the place to dictate change in your schools in most cases, correct? But do you know the process for understanding systems and how to work to make those systems move in a direction that supports what your interest, your students' interest, the programs that you're developing? We'll come back and look at that. Another piece is behavioral feedback, the issues of reinforcement and punishment. Can you distinguish between negative reinforcement and punishment? They're not the same thing, and yet, as a school psychologist, many of my colleagues will talk about punishment and use the term negative reinforcement. Why does that matter? Because when we start setting up our plans, if you don't know the difference, we can get into some trouble. And then having teamwork time with the plans that you brought and some support from me as I wander through the groups. Here's what I would like you to do. I would like you to take 2 minutes at your table and then be able to give me some feedback about the things that you heard and would like to do here so that I know if you want to add some of the systems change pieces, some of those things. Give me some feedback, 2 minutes, okay, at your table. Three, 2, and 1. May I have your attention, please? Give me some feedback about the things that you saw and what I'd planned, what some of the options are, and some feedback about what you were looking for. Are you just along for the ride?
I'm mostly concerned about infrastructure and the presenting cases and teaming,
Okay.
working as a
Okay.
team and pulling the team together.
Okay. Yes?
Systems change.
Systems change?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to try to help others, have a little different thought about how they're dealing with behaviors and not just seeing it as black and white and as a student problem.
Okay. Yes?
The systems change or learning about the systems, because in our situation we're at 4 different sites within 4 different schools. We're not really connected to the district or the schools that we're within. We're kind of our own entity within their schools, so maybe trying to develop a system-wide within our own program or something.
How many of you have taken classes or been to workshops on how to understand systems and make systems change? See, 4. Okay. How many of you feel that it would be valuable to you to learn more about how to understand systems and how to make systemic change when it comes to thinking about how to get supports for your students? How do we get the system to move in that direction? Let me see hands if that would be of interest to you. Okay. 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 Other feedback? Yes?
I think having departments work together, especially at the high school level, where the different departments are just clueless about how to work with special ed kids and, you know, and working together as part of the team.
Special ed kids, do we have them in our school? Yeah. Yes, I understand. I get that. Yes.
It's kind of what the lady in the green said. Ways to take our information back. We always say this. It's hard. I think that a lot of the teachers don't buy into it. They don't understand why it would work this way. And so just more ways to make them see how it works, I guess, because that's the, you know, BPS or VSP that gets stuck in the drawer. Mm-hmm. But how do you change that when it's, you know, the 3 of us, you know?
Okay. Yes.
We work in a unique environment that's a residential setting, that's a public school, and I think a lot of it, you know, our options as professionals in terms of training the parapros, because there's a lot of them there that work for the kids, caregiving and the educational part of it, and I find that modeling is really one of our few options.
Yes.
And sometimes we get a little stuck because we need to have them just be able to learn to observe and then move on from there. So really doing some of that basic training. So it's the same kind of a system change issue, but maybe with a different light.
Yep. And actually that's one of the key elements. How many of you have the opportunity to do training for other folks, formally or informally? Okay. I mean, I think this is one of the pieces, when we talk about the informal piece, it may be what they call the one-legged conversation. This is when you stand on the wall and you have one foot back and you just sit and it's like, how long can you talk about this? And you take 10 minutes until you've changed legs 4 times, 5 times, and the conversation's over and you move on. That can be training. And that can be very valuable training. And my experience is the paraprofessionals, the EAs, the IAs, are people who carry a lot of responsibility for student programs and oftentimes get the least amount of training, least amount of support, and they are often our entree, our foot in the door to making change, making systems happen. How many of you have done training in how to think functionally about behavior for other staff? Okay. That is one of the things that we are going to ask. We're going to give you some modeling for today. We're going to give you some processes for today, and then I'm going to ask that you do that before November when we return, is that you actually set up an opportunity. If you can't do this with a group, at least see if you can't sit down and do this for one other person and walk them through the process. I think this is a piece that creates systems change in ways that's a lot more subtle than we think about with going to the superintendent and the superintendent says thou shalt. Okay. Anything else with regard to today? Feedback about training? Teamwork time with support. Is that a piece of it? How many of you are came wanting to do some of that piece of it? Okay. Okay. And behavioral feedback. This is the piece about reinforcement and punishment, correction, those kinds of pieces. How many of you would like to see a piece on that? Raise your hand if I can. Okay. Okay. During the break, I will squeeze some of these pieces in and we'll move as quickly as we need to get through some of those pieces. Okay. I'm going to go back through a couple of things very briefly. As I said, some background pieces, some background knowledge. I want to start with big ideas because I think that these are pieces that underlie, these are the foundational pieces that need to be at the heart of every behavior training. First one is that behavior is lawful. What does that mean? It follows laws, it follows rules, it is not meaningless. It is not purely random. It has some meaning, which means it can be understood. Something that is purely random is very hard to understand. Behavior is not random. Behavior is also contextual. Behavior is based on the environment. If people don't believe that, the whole rest of your behavior support plan is going to go into the waste can. So having these discussions about helping people understand that behavior is based on the context in which your student exists is a critical element to understanding why they should do the behavior support plan or the things laid out in the behavior support plan. Contextual. I sometimes use an extreme example, and I'll use it today. You can use it or choose to leave it in the waste bin. How many of you would commit murder under the right circumstances? How many of you have a child that you love more than anything in the world? If you knew that somebody was going to hurt that child and the only way to stop it was to kill them, would you do it? Now, in every group there's usually one person who says, no, I don't think I would, I don't think I could. I have tremendous respect for that person, and I would say, that's not me. Now, I want you to think about many of the students who live in our programs live in a world where they are under fire, they are under attack, they are under siege, and it is a matter of survival for them to do the behaviors they do. Back in about 97 or so, I was working for the Institute on Violence and Destructive Behavior at the University of Oregon. And I was doing training in bullying and harassment. And you know the old piece about when you're doing training, you get the hook in there. It's like the motivator piece. And so I said, I want you to all think back to middle school or maybe high school or elementary, but I want you to think back to a time when you were bullied or harassed. I want you to remember what it was like to either be bullied or harassed or to observe a friend that was being bullied or harassed. I thought it would be sort of vague memories and it would sort of hook people in. I had people in the audience who were crying. I had people who looked like I had just reactivated their post-traumatic stress. And what became very clear to me is that many of us get this concept that life can be very difficult and the environment plays a huge role in how we behave. But if your staff that you work with who are asked to implement the behavior support plan don't understand the concept that it's not just about the student, it's about the context, your behavior support plan will sit. It will go idle. This is actually why when we talk about doing assessments of kids to assess their violence potential, it just isn't very valuable. What we have to look at is under what contexts are individuals aggressive or violent or fill in the blank with the behavior. Data is critical. We get fooled very easily. We get misled. We look at the wrong things. There's actually some evidence when we look at autism that one of the reasons that they seem so out of touch with what we think is obvious is they actually focus on the wrong information in a situation, in a context. Sometimes we do too. Focus on changeable events. That piece of behavior should be about things we have. Remember the serenity prayer? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Society, elections, and all those kind of things in the school context are outside of our control. What do we have control over? And continuous improvement and collaboration or teamwork are necessary to make a difference. Okay. All I want to say with historical perspectives is that you have to understand that the historical perspective is relevant in the way we've interpreted where behavior comes from. We can talk about the historical era, professional setting, immediate setting, desired function. All of these are ways that we interpret it. We can talk about it changing over time. I have colleagues who come out of different training programs that interpret things in very different ways. So when we start talking about a behavior support plan, if you don't have individualized counseling in there, they just don't see it as being relevant or valuable. They don't get that you can't just sit down with a good therapist and work through this. The system determines what the information and the definition and the example and the interventions are. We're coming out of a system, and I'm going to be talking about a system that's very much focused on learning theory, that we can change environment to change learning. And if you don't believe that it's contextual, we can look at the differences in rates of identification across states for the same disability or disorder. Why does this matter? Really because it's about access to services and funding. But it's also about the programs that we develop. We have ethical responsibilities as educators. We have a responsibility to create a safe environment, to use evidence-based interventions, to use prevention versus intervention whenever possible. And then we have to balance competing interests. How many of you struggle with dealing with this issue of, I want to keep the student in an included environment? And how do I do that in a way that doesn't ruin it, doesn't put other students at risk, and doesn't put their education at risk? These are competing interests that can be very, very tough. The individual versus the group. Best practice versus what's realistic. What are some of the other concerns, competing interests that you deal with? Are there others that come to mind?
Home values versus school values.
Home values versus school values. These are things that we deal with every day as part of a team. There's confidentiality and information sharing as an ethical piece, going beyond mere procedural compliance. You can meet procedural requirements without having a good program. And the must versus should. All I want to say with regard to ethics is when you're thinking about ethical issues, I would ask you to think about three things or engage in three practices. Number one, when in doubt, select the more conservative approach. If the question is, should we restrain or should we not restrain? Start with safety. What's safe? And then keep your hands off if at all possible. It's a more conservative approach. Should we use a locked timeout room? Had people see these conversations, and most times states go, don't think so, right? Think about what's the more conservative approach. But here's the key. I want you, when in doubt, to seek professional consultation with trusted colleagues. Have the discussion, what do you think is the ethical route here, and document your process. Some legal perspectives. Extremely brief overview with reminder I'm not an attorney. You have a lot of laws that govern educational practice. I'm not going to go through them all. But my guess is you have policies and procedures in your district, have laws at your state and policies and procedures at your state level, and all I want you to hear is it is crucial that you follow those, including when you're doing the FBA and BSP process. Make sure that you are familiar with what they are and make sure that you follow them. I've included in your packet some examples of the laws that impact functional behavioral assessment. Things even down to if you go to FERPA and HIPAA and how we control the records and what we do with those. There's some pieces about hearings, and you can get on your spectacles or get out your microscope and read some of those and make sure that you're familiar with what's required of you legally. Is that the fastest trip you've ever heard through ethical and legal requirements with FBA? Every now and then I'm going to stop and I want to just check. I want to check to make sure that you're following along with where we're at and see what questions you have. So, what questions do you have? Are we ready to continue? Okay. Research and discipline. A question that often comes up in guiding what we do is, what's the role of research in developing discipline policies and implementing discipline practices? There are some if you've not noticed this, dramatically different philosophies about education and educational practice. When it comes to functional assessment, you guys have a little bit of an edge in some ways, but it may put you at risk. Here's one of the things that's sort of an interesting one. So your state senator instituted, brought about, supported an act in the state that supported research-based practices, positive behavior support, etc., right? Now the question is, if he doesn't get elected, is that out? Does that become a scapegoat for the political issues? This often happens, right? What's in, what's out is based on political whim. How's that impacted by research? What do people believe about research? I have this discussion with my dad a lot. He's a physical therapist, or was, retired. And the issue is, he says, but research can be made to say anything. And I say, Dad, as a therapist, you should be a man of science. You should understand that there's that piece of the underlying, if you're a good consumer of research, you know what's good research and what to believe in. But not everybody agrees with that. And so when you're having these discussions about thinking functionally and what's the research and what's the evidence, remember that not everybody comes at it with that same perspective. Brief history, we redirected kids. What did we do with kids who weren't fitting in to the education mold when it started? We sent them elsewhere. We sent them out to work, we left them at home, etc. Removal from school. We allowed them into school, but if they were too much of a trouble, we removed them. And then civil rights came along and we started saying, what do we do with kids who are different than the mainstream kids? And then school shootings came along. And now we were back with another competing interest. And then there was accountability. And all of these things impacted American public schools' discipline practices. Here's a quote from Drago and Yell. Unfortunately, rather than adopting research-based practices in the FBA and BIP process, many school districts have developed chart systems based on a list of misbehaviors and potential causes in which the entire process becomes a brief exercise in marking boxes and filling in the blanks. Such practices are not likely to withstand administrative or judicial scrutiny when challenged in a due process hearing or at a court of law. This is that piece of, do we go beyond procedural issues? There's a definition of evidence-based practices, but evidence-based practices are essentially those things that have been shown to be effective not only in a research setting, but in a real-world setting, and they're well enough described that they can be replicated. What are some traditional approaches to managing antisocial behavior? Punishment-based strategies. Can't we just beat them into submission? I mean, it sounds funny, but I'll tell you, as I work with parent groups, I get parents all the time who come up to me and say, you know what, as a kid, I got spankings, I got beat, and they'll describe in detail some of their experiences. And see, I turned out okay. Wow. What do we know? What's the research say about the use of punishment? We'll come back and talk about that later. Medication. I remember having a kiddo in my school who was removed by the police for protection from his father. He had mild developmental disabilities, huge anxiety. They put him in the back of a police car and locked it on a hot June day in Southern California. By the time he had been sitting back there for about 20 minutes at the station while they tried to figure out what to do with him, he was frothing at the mouth and trying to get out of the car. They assumed he was psychotic, took him to the psych unit, and when I saw him a day and a half later, he didn't recognize me. He could barely move, couldn't sit up on the bed unassisted. Now that's the extreme, isn't it? But that is a way that we often see dealing with problem behaviors through medication. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not opposed to medication. I am not opposed to medication. But I do think we need to be very careful when we use it to make sure it is done appropriately and it's not the sole thing. We've often secluded or excluded kids with behavior disorders, and we've often used psychoanalysis, counseling, and psychotherapy. And the evidence is pretty clear. At the risk of offending, this is not a good management tool for kids with antisocial behavior. What do we know about punishment in schools? Schools that use a punishment-based behavior management system have increased rates of verbal and physical aggression, property destruction and vandalism, tardiness, truancy, and dropout. Now, we can talk about that as a school, but if we're using it in our program, in our classroom, I believe the same things will happen. So we're going to talk very briefly about what works. And maybe this was what you were hoping for. This is humor, by the way, just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
As a mom with 3 active kids, I've got to make sure I know what they're up to at all times. And as any mom will tell you, they can be a handful. That's why I give my kids Kidstone Chewable Valium.
Kidstone Chewable Valium, the barbiturate the whole family can enjoy.
And once the Kidstone Chewable Valiums kick in, these kids kind of stay right where you put them. They're quiet, relaxed. It's a dream. And just about all you have to do is check their breathing every once in a while or just poke at them with a stick.
Kidstone Chewable Valium, from the makers of nitrous oxide balloon animals.
It is humor. That's probably my middle school version of humor, but oftentimes we do interventions that are for us, not for the benefit of kids. And that's really what medication is sometimes about. That is what seclusion and exclusion are often about. And we need to be careful. Is this preparing kids for a better quality life? What works? There's a list of things that I've put in your packet. Positive, inclusive classroom or school culture. Monitoring impressions, frequent expressions of positive regard. Communicating high expectations. You know, when it comes down to the bottom line in this, I want every student to come to school and have 2 responses as they're walking up to the school. Number 1, inside this building is someone who knows me, loves me, cares about me, is committed to my success. Every kid who is bonded to an adult in that way has a far better chance of being successful in school and out of school. Number 2 is I want them to think of that school, that place, as being a place where good things happen to them. 2 things. Inside the building is someone who cares about me, and 2, inside this place, good things happen to me. Clear boundaries between periods, brief transitions, cooperative learning strategies, systematic approaches to teaching social skills, structured learning environment, clear expectations. You can go through this list, but there's a number of things that we know are evidence-based and a number of things we know are not. Be cautious with things that are not evidence-based. What's the primary difference between a traditional approach and a more evidence-based approach in working with behavioral issues? Traditionally, we work with the child. We modify the child. We work on the child. We fix the child. And what we're moving towards here is an evidence-based approach where we're looking really at the environment. So, what I want you to do is in your packet, you have the Positive Behavior Support Classroom Walkthrough. What I would like you to do is real quickly with your group, just have a discussion and say, is our classroom, is our program And or is the larger environment that our student operates in, are they using evidence-based practices? We're not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I'd like you to take 2 or 3 minutes and just have this brief discussion. In our classroom or program, are we using evidence-based practices? And number 2, are the other environments in which our students operate, are they experiencing evidence-based practices there? Just a couple of minutes.
Enough so it was visible that kids could see it. Sometimes I've seen it on individual student desks, things like that. The daily schedule posted would be first period we have math, second period we have science, third period we have reading. The class outline would be in math we are doing A, B, and C. In science we are doing X, Y, Z, etc. Academic verbal praise would be a positive interaction with a student on something academic. Behavioral verbal praise would be the same thing but related to behavior. An academic verbal prompt would be like a correction. Not necessarily positive or negative, but a redirection, a correction. Same thing with the behavioral verbal prompt. The behavioral nonverbal prompt would be proximity, standing closer to the student, putting your hand on their shoulder, giving them a look, giving them some sort of secret code that means quit it. The token economy system is where they would earn things for their behaviors within the class. And then the positive reinforcement practice is like a variety of different ways that you positively approach and interact your students. High fives, praises, thumbs up, stickers, stars. Questions? Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead and take just another minute or 2 with your team and just have that discussion. Are these things in place? 4, 3, 2, and 1. I don't know where this quote came from other than it's Willa Foster, and I can't find her referenced for anything else, but I love this quote. Quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. As we go into developing the plans and implementing the plans, it's important that all these components are there, and we'll talk more about these as we go through it. We're going to go through one more piece, and then we're going to take a brief break. I just want to go back through very briefly the components of PBS, philosophical components, and see how they link up with what we're doing at the individual support system level. First and foremost, PBS is a philosophical framework. It's a way we think about doing business. It's a way we think about student behavior. It's a way we structure our activities. If in your system you don't have a system of behavior supports, your kids will fall through the cracks. Having an integrated system that we know is non-overlapping and that there's not big gaps is critical. So we want to structure our thinking and we want to structure our interventions into systematic thinking and systems of support. A systems approach for enhancing capacity. All I want to say here is we have to think as systems. We have to think not as individuals. Even when you're feeling like you're the outlier in your school, it's important to think about how can we collaborate? How can we increase relationships and build connections and collaborate? It's a process for capacity building. One of the most important things is that we continue to be growing and developing greater capacity both as individuals and as systems. If we simply build capacity as individuals, these kids with difficult behavior can still swamp our boat. It's important that we build the systems that will support their behavior in important ways. PBS advocates for the use of a continuum of behavior supports. You know this piece, right? How many of you have the prerequisite PBS triangle tattooed somewhere, right? Okay. You've seen this over and over. But the reason to see it over and over is to understand how this all connects together. If you don't have this universal green zone intervention set in place, the chances that your individual student support will work are very poor. Now, that does not mean that you can't put these in place in your classroom. That's a place to start. That is a place you have control over, is working with your behavior in the system you do have control over. My experience has been there are some systems that are easier to work with than others. But having those conversations, you can start finding who your allies are. And as we come back and talk about systems change, we'll come back and see how building the support systems makes sense. And talking about it over and over with your colleagues in general education, over time, they start getting it. It is the truth that, it does feel like beating your head against the wall sometimes, but the wall does move over time. The rest of this is in there. It talks about the link between academics and behavior, and it talks about some examples of primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions. We want to be prevention focused. If we took all of the kids out of your classroom or program, sent them to Oregon, and we brought in all new students, are there some behaviors that you would predict are still going to happen? If we know that, don't we have an obligation to prevent problem behavior to the best of our ability? I think the answer is yes. PBS is about prevention of known and predictable behavior. One of the things that was interesting when I came in as director of the program in Southern California is how many kids had 35 or 40 restraints and no safety plan. The question was, could you predict that this behavior will happen again? And the answer usually is, we hope it won't. Okay? We want to be prevention focused. What's the best prevention? Good instruction. Good instruction academically and good instruction behaviorally. A model, lead, and test format. We'll come back to this when you're developing your teaching plan for thinking functionally and teach and reteach. It's based on empirically sound practices. We use evidence-based approaches. We collect assessment information to make sure it's working with our students here. And we're committed to using what works and getting rid of what does not work. What questions do you have? Okay. It is 10:54. Let's take a 10-minute break. We will get you back. Is that enough time? Okay. 10 minutes, we'll be back, and I'll give you sort of a heads up at about a minute or two. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. May I have your attention, please? Good. Thank you. All right, let's talk just briefly about the green zone and some of the things that go into the pieces there, and then we'll talk about how we build upward as we go into the yellow and red zone. There's essentially 5 key features of school-wide PBS. One is clear expectations. So on the checklist here, or the walkthrough, it's talking about having positively stated expectations posted. In order to do that, you have to have 3 to 5 positively stated expectations, right? This is the hardest part usually in programs, is getting the adults to come to agreement. But having that matrix is really important. And if we want to move kids from a place of being watched by you as the police to being self-managing, we have 3 to 5 conceptual rules. And we go as I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Raven.
Raven. As Raven was saying, these rules are not don't walk, don't hit, don't kick, don't bite, no scratching, no hitting, all those kind of things. It goes back to the concepts that help them outside of school. Being safe, being respectful, being responsible, being kind, whatever those pieces are. They need to be in the posters, they need to be in the handbook. It needs to be part of a system that can be widely understood by kids and parents and teachers as this is the way we do business. Explicitly taught. System for encouraging. Let's break down these into each of the specific pieces. When we get done, we're going to build up into looking at the larger steps of this. We'll come back. We're going to do this piece by piece. Explicitly taught. It's not enough to simply have the rules there. They have to be explicitly taught. And what we're finding now is it used to be as little as 4 years ago, we used to talk about an annual kids going station to station and learning all the behaviors and all the areas. That is simply insufficient. We're now saying at least 3 times with all the rules everywhere. So when you look at this, when we talk about the stations in August or September, whenever your school year starts, most schools now are coming back and doing it again somewhere around Thanksgiving or Halloween. They're doing it again after winter break, and many of them do it again after spring break. And I know a lot of teachers will say, whoa, wait a minute, isn't that a lot of instructional time that's gone? It is instructional time. It is simply not the academic instructional time. Yes?
Are you talking about a review of rules? You're saying stations. I guess I'm not quite clear what you mean.
Good question.
Stations.
Okay. Good clarification. So in the schools that are doing this, and you can do this in your program, it doesn't have to be the whole school that does this, never ask a student to go somewhere or do something that they've not been taught how to be successful there or doing that. So for example, at the beginning of the year, if you have a matrix, how many of you are you familiar with the concept of the matrix and having the conceptual rules? Okay, so basically what it comes down to is the concept, take the concept, if you've got 3 to 5 rules such as be safe, be respectful, be responsible, you have to line out what does that mean. Being safe means we walk in the hallway, or being respectful means we use an indoor voice and respect the learning that's going on in other classrooms, etc. Now what we do is take those, and each of those areas or activities becomes a lesson plan. And the students need to be taught those in a circuit fashion or in some fashion before they're ever asked to go there and do the behavior. So before they have lunch, you teach them how to behave in lunch conditions, whether that's in the cafeteria or in the classroom, wherever they eat their lunch. If they're going out onto the playground, they need to be taught how to do those behaviors there. And what we know is that circuit needs to be repeated at least 3 times during the year. That is not the only reviews, though. Those reviews should be ongoing in smaller chunks as well. And in order to do this, we set up systems. When we talk about the infrastructure, this is the systems that support this. Reinforcement systems are not for kids. Teaching systems are not for kids. They're to support our behavior. Having a calendar, having a system for encouraging desired behavior is about structuring adult behavior. System for discouraging undesired behavior, and a data tracking system to let us know, are we doing it and are students benefiting from it? As we move up, typically a process that we're seeing that schools go through is oftentimes the teachers, the certified staff, will go through this process, but oftentimes our paraprofessionals get left out. So it may happen in the beginning, it may not, but we need to get all the people in the same place because the paraprofessionals are critical players in this. And then we bring the classroom systems in. Now that may be where your system starts and ends in terms of your control of it. Why does this matter when we move up into the yellow and red zone? Because in the yellow and red zone, one of the things that we're doing is intensifying the supports that are built at the green zone. Now my understanding was Terry talked about check-in, check-out, or the behavior support. Okay. All right, behavior education program. When we do those things, one of the critical pieces, one of the critical elements of the behavior education check-in, check-out, or some people call it HUGS, hello, update, goodbye for the